Millionaire CEO spent the night broken and silent, until his maid changed everything that night. Millionaire CEO spent the night broken and silent, until his maid changed everything that night. The city lights twinkled like stars against the darkening sky, but Mason couldn't appreciate their beauty. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office showed a man he barely recognized. Disheveled hair, loosened tie, and eyes that held more questions than answers. The skyline of glass and steel that usually filled him with pride now seemed to mock his failures. His fingers drummed against the polished mahogany desk, the steady rhythm matching his racing heartbeat. The investor's words still rang in his ears, sharp and cutting. "The numbers don't lie, Mason. This project is bleeding money, and we need immediate changes." He reached for the crystal tumbler on his desk, the amber liquid inside catching the last rays of sunlight. The ice clinked against the glass as his hand trembled slightly. Mason hadn't touched it yet. He couldn't afford to blur his thoughts any further, not when everything was falling apart. The prototype designs for their revolutionary software lay scattered across his desk, months of work reduced to unviable and too risky by people who cared more about quarterly profits than innovation. His team had poured their hearts into this project, working countless late nights and weekends. Now it all seemed futile. Mason's gaze drifted to the family photo on his desk, the only personal touch in his otherwise sterile office. It showed a younger version of himself with his mother, both smiling at some long-forgotten joke. The frame was dusty. He couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at it. His mother would have known what to say, how to navigate this crisis. But she wasn't here, and he'd spent years trying to prove he could succeed on his own. The setting sun cast long shadows across the expensive carpet as Mason paced the length of his office. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. He'd built this company from the ground up, taking risks that others called crazy, pushing boundaries that seemed impossible. Now it all balanced on a knife's edge. His phone buzzed again, the 5th time in the past hour. Without looking, he knew it would be another board member, another demand for explanations, another reminder of his mounting failures. The device slid across his desk as he pushed it away, unable to face more confrontation. The mansion's security system hummed to life as darkness fell, automatically illuminating the grounds below. Mason watched as the garden lights created pools of warmth in the gathering dusk. The house had always felt too big for just him, but tonight its emptiness seemed appropriate, a physical manifestation of the void growing inside him. Walking to his private bathroom, Mason splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror stared back at him, water dripping from his chin, dark circles under his eyes betraying weeks of sleepless nights. When had he last taken a real break? When had he last felt truly confident about his direction? The sound of his shoes echoing through the empty corridors felt hollow as he made his way to his home office. This room, with its leather-bound books and carefully curated art pieces, had always been his sanctuary. Now it felt like a prison of his own making. The sophisticated security system beeped softly as he engaged the locks, effectively shutting out the world. His phone lit up again, casting an artificial glow in the dimness. Email notifications, text messages, missed calls, all demanding his attention, all expecting answers he didn't have. Mason placed the phone face down on his desk, the gesture feeling both defiant and defeated. The silence enveloped him like a heavy blanket. In this moment of solitude, the carefully constructed facade of the successful CEO crumbled, leaving behind a man grappling with his own limitations and fears. The night stretched ahead of him, long and empty, but for once, Mason welcomed the darkness. At least in the quiet, he didn't have to pretend anymore. The leather chair creaked as Mason sank into it, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of defeat. In the dimness of his office, illuminated only by the soft glow of his desk lamp, he buried his face in his hands. His fingers pressed against his temples, trying to massage away the tension that had been building there for hours. The mansion's silence pressed in around him, broken only by the gentle hum of the central air system. Through gaps in his fingers, he stared at the scattered papers on his desk. Project proposals, financial reports, and urgent memos that seemed to mock him with their presence. The carefully organized space that usually gave him comfort now felt suffocating. Outside his office, soft footsteps padded along the hallway's hardwood floors. Emma moved with practiced quietness, her years of service having taught her the rhythms of the house. She'd been watching Mason's descent into despair throughout the evening, noting how his usual confident stride had given way to weighted steps, how his typically straight posture had crumbled. The door hinges whispered as Emma entered, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She carried a silver tray with a glass of water and some light refreshments, a habit she'd developed over time, knowing that Mason often forgot to eat when stressed. The subtle scent of lemon from her cleaning earlier still lingered in the air, mixing with the leather and wood notes that defined the space. Mason didn't look up at her entrance, lost in his own troubled thoughts. His expensive suit, usually impeccable, was wrinkled from hours of wear. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually well-styled hair was mussed from running his fingers through it countless times. Emma set the tray down quietly on the side table, her movements smooth and practiced. She straightened, taking in the scene before her, the scattered papers, the untouched tumbler of amber liquid, the family photo pushed aside. The room told a story of a man at his breaking point, one she'd watched unfold over many months of service. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking each heavy moment. Through the windows, city lights twinkled against the dark sky, a reminder of the world continuing beyond these walls. Emma's reflection ghosted in the glass as she stood there, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. Mason's breathing was uneven, each exhale carrying the weight of unspoken worries. His hands slowly lowered from his face, revealing eyes reddened from exhaustion and stress. He stared blankly at the desk before him, still not acknowledging Emma's presence, not out of rudeness, but from being so deeply lost in his own thoughts. The distance between them seemed both physical and metaphorical. The successful CEO and his maid, separated by social status and circumstance. Yet Emma saw beyond these superficial barriers. She recognized the universal language of human struggle, having faced her own challenges in life. Emma moved forward, her steps measured and purposeful. The carpet muffled her movements as she positioned herself where Mason would have to acknowledge her presence. The light from the desk lamp cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting the quiet determination in her expression. "Mr. Mason," she began, her voice gentle but firm, carrying a wisdom that transcended her role as a housekeeper. The familiar warmth in her tone held no judgment, only understanding. She stood straight, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, projecting a calm that seemed to ripple through the tension-filled air. Mason's head lifted slightly at the sound of her voice, his eyes finally focusing on something beyond his internal turmoil. The unexpected intrusion into his solitude brought him back to the present moment, and he found himself looking at Emma, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time in all the years she'd worked for him. The silence in the office shifted as Emma's words hung in the air. Mason's fingers uncurled from their tight grip on his armrests, his shoulders dropping slightly as the tension began to ease. The gentle hum of the air conditioning filled the space between them, punctuated by the soft ticking of the wall clock. "Sometimes," Emma continued, her voice carrying the same steady warmth. We get so caught up in what others expect from us that we forget to listen to our own hearts. She remained standing, her presence both unobtrusive and grounding. Mason's throat worked as he swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere past his desk. The city lights beyond his window blurred slightly as his eyes grew moist. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. I've watched you these past few weeks, Emma said softly, taking a small step forward. The way you carry the weight of everyone's expectations, the late nights, the endless meetings, the pressure you put on yourself. A shaky breath escaped Mason's lips. His usual armor of confidence and control was cracking, revealing the vulnerability beneath. His fingers traced absent patterns on his desk's polished surface, a nervous habit he'd developed in recent months. He started, his voice rough with emotion. He cleared his throat and tried again. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. The admission seemed to cost him something, his shoulders hunching as if bracing for judgment that didn't come. Emma's silence was encouraging, her presence steady and patient. The light from his desk lamp cast a warm glow across her face, highlighting the compassion in her eyes. Everything I've built, Mason continued, the words coming easier now. It all feels hollow. His hand gestured vaguely at the office around him, at the trappings of success that suddenly seemed meaningless. The investors want numbers, growth, profit margins. They don't care about innovation or making a real difference. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His reflection ghosted against the dark glass, superimposed over the city lights below. I used to have dreams, you know, real dreams, not just about making money, but about creating something meaningful. Emma watched him, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She made no move to interrupt, understanding that sometimes people needed space to let their thoughts unfold. And now? Mason's voice cracked slightly. Now I'm afraid I'm failing at even the shallow goals I've settled for. The project we've been working on for months, it's falling apart. The investors are pulling back. My team is losing faith. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, closing his eyes. Maybe they're right to doubt me. The hardest critic, Emma offered quietly, is often the one we see in the mirror. Mason turned to look at her. Really look at her, perhaps for the first time. Her simple uniform and unassuming presence contrasted sharply with the luxury surrounding them. Yet she stood with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. I feel... He hesitated, searching for words. I feel disconnected. From everything. From what I wanted to be. From what I'm doing. He trailed off, thinking of his mother, of relationships left to wither in pursuit of success. Emma moved to the side table, pouring him a fresh glass of water. The simple act of care seemed to break something loose in Mason's chest. He accepted the glass with trembling fingers, their hands briefly touching in the exchange. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees past the title, past the success, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. If anyone would care if it all fell apart tomorrow. He took a sip of water, using the moment to steady himself. I'm tired of pretending I have all the answers. Emma stood quietly, her presence offering silent support as Mason continued to share the burden he'd been carrying alone for so long. The night stretched out before them, filled with honest words and gentle understanding. The city lights twinkled through the window as Mason leaned against his desk, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. Emma moved to collect his untouched coffee cup from earlier, her movements unhurried and precise. Your mother used to do that too, she said softly, almost to herself. Mason's head snapped up, his eyes widening. What did you say? Emma paused, the cup suspended mid-air. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. She hesitated, then set the cup back down. I worked for your mother years ago before coming here. You knew my mother? Mason's voice cracked slightly. He straightened, his full attention now focused on Emma. The revelation hit him like a physical force, making him grip the edge of his desk for support. Emma nodded, her eyes growing distant with memory. I was quite young then, just starting out. She gave me my first job, actually. A gentle smile touched her lips. She was different from what most people saw. Mason swallowed hard, his throat tight. Different how? The question came out barely above a whisper. His memories of his mother were like faded photographs. Formal dinners, brief goodnight kisses, always somehow just out of reach. She had this way about her, Emma began, carefully choosing her words. Every morning she'd make tea for everyone in the house, not just family but staff too. She'd serve it herself, asking about our families, our dreams. Emma's eyes grew soft with remembrance. She believed everyone had potential, no matter where they came from. Mason sank slowly into his chair, his legs suddenly weak. This image of his mother, warm, caring, involved, was so different from his memories of a distant figure always rushing to the next charity event or board meeting. There was this one time, Emma continued, her voice gentle, when I was struggling to pay for my sister's medical bills. Your mother found out. She always seemed to know when something was wrong. She didn't just help with the bills. She spent hours helping me set up a budget, teaching me about investments. Emma's fingers traced the edge of her apron. She said knowledge was the greatest gift she could give anyone. Mason's chest tightened. He remembered the investment books his mother had given him for his birthdays, books he'd dismissed as impersonal gifts from a busy parent. Now they took on a new meaning. She kept a journal, Emma shared, her voice soft with memory. Every night she'd write down 3 things: something she was grateful for, someone she'd helped, and a dream she was working toward. Emma paused, watching as Mason pressed his fingers to his eyes. She mentioned you often in those grateful moments. A small sound escaped Mason's throat, part laugh, part sob. I barely knew her, he admitted, his voice rough. Always thought she was too busy for us, too caught up in her work and her causes. She was worried about that, Emma said quietly. She'd talk about you, about wanting to give you both security and purpose. She used to say that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch. Mason stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection showed him a face he barely recognized, vulnerable, stripped of its usual confident mask. All this time, he whispered, I thought I was building something different from her, something bigger, more important. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. But I didn't even know what she was building. She was building bridges, Emma said softly. Between people, between dreams and reality. She saw potential everywhere, in her work, in the people around her. She paused. In you, especially. Mason turned, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Tell me more, he requested, his voice barely steady. Please. Tell me about my mother. Emma settled into one of the office chairs, smoothing her uniform as she gathered her thoughts. The city lights cast soft shadows across the room, creating an intimate atmosphere that made sharing easier. Your mother had this small garden room, Emma began, her voice warm with memory. It wasn't anything fancy, just a sunny corner with some comfortable chairs and lots of plants. But that's where she'd meet with people who needed help. Not just with checkbooks, but with real guidance. Mason sat across from her, completely still, drinking in every detail about the mother he'd never truly known. I was drowning in debt back then, Emma continued. Working 3 jobs, barely sleeping. Your mother noticed how tired I was one day and invited me to tea in that garden room. She smiled softly. I thought she was going to fire me. Instead, she asked about my dreams. Mason's hands tightened on his armrests. What did you tell her? I told her I wanted to start my own business, but it seemed impossible. I had no education, no connections, no money. Emma's eyes grew distant with the memory. You know what she said? She said, "Impossible just means no one's done it yet." A strangled sound escaped Mason's throat. She used to say that to me too. I'd forgotten. She didn't just give advice, Emma continued. She taught me about business plans, market research, online platforms. She helped me set up my first website, showed me how to track expenses and revenue. Emma's voice grew softer. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Mason leaned forward, his expression intense. What kind of business did you want to start? Emma hesitated, then squared her shoulders. An online marketplace for sustainable home goods. I saw how much waste there was in wealthy households, how many perfectly good items were thrown away. I wanted to create a platform where people could find quality second-hand luxury items while reducing waste. Did you ever start it? Mason asked, his business instincts beginning to stir. Emma's fingers twisted in her lap. I did. Your mother helped me launch it from that garden room. She even became my first supplier, consigning some of her own pieces to help me build inventory. Mason's brow furrowed. But you're still... He gestured at her uniform. Still a maid? Emma's smile held a hint of irony. Yes, because I learned something valuable from your mother. Success doesn't have to look the way others expect it to. She took a deep breath, seeming to come to a decision. Mason, my company, Sustainable Luxury Exchange, cleared 8 figures last year. We have warehouses in 3 countries and a customer base that spans the globe. Mason stared at her, his mouth falling open. His own tech company, despite all its publicity and venture capital funding, had yet to break even. I kept working here because I promised your mother I'd look after you, Emma continued quietly. And because this job reminds me to stay humble, to never forget where I started. Every day I clean these floors, I remember that success isn't about how others see you. It's about staying true to your vision. Mason stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. All this time, he said, his voice hoarse. All this time while I've been chasing investors and trying to prove myself, your mother always said that true success grows quietly, like her garden. Emma replied softly. It doesn't need spotlights or headlines. It just needs nurturing and patience. Mason stopped pacing, turning to face her with new eyes. The quiet maid who had served him coffee and cleaned his house for years suddenly appeared transformed. Not in appearance, but in his perception. Here was someone who had achieved exactly what he'd been striving for, but without the desperate need for validation that had driven him to the breaking point. I think, he said slowly, I need to hear more about your business model. Mason slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling from Emma's revelation. The city lights outside his office window seemed to mock him now, their bright corporate logos representing everything he'd chased at the expense of true fulfillment. 8 figures. The number echoed in his head, each repetition a fresh wound to his ego. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, trying to hide his unsteady movements. Here he was, drowning in investor pressure and failing projects, while his maid, had built an empire right under his nose. I need a moment, he managed, his voice rough. Emma remained perfectly still in her chair, her posture relaxed but dignified. She didn't seem smug or boastful. If anything, she appeared slightly uncomfortable having revealed her secret. Mason stood and paced the length of his office, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood floors that Emma herself had polished countless times. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many times had he walked past her, barely acknowledging her presence? How many times had he left coffee cups for her to clean up, thinking himself too important to handle such mundane tasks? "All those times you helped organize my desk," he said suddenly, turning to face her. "You weren't just cleaning. You were—" He trailed off, understanding dawning. Emma nodded. "I was trying to help you implement better systems. The same ones I use in my business." She smiled softly. "Your mother taught me that organization is the foundation of success." The mention of his mother cut through his wounded pride. Here was someone who had known the real woman behind the few formal photographs he possessed. Someone who had learned from her and carried her wisdom forward. "I've been such a fool," Mason said, sinking back into his chair. "Running myself ragged trying to prove something to people who only care about quarterly reports, while real success was right here, quietly mopping my floors." Emma leaned forward, her eyes kind but firm. "Success isn't a competition, Mason. Your mother understood that. It's why she helped so many people, including me. She knew that true wealth isn't just about money. It's about creating value that lasts." Mason studied Emma's face, seeing her clearly for the first time. There was a quiet confidence in her bearing that he'd never noticed before, an innate dignity that had nothing to do with designer suits or corner offices. She had built something meaningful while staying true to herself, never feeling the need to broadcast her achievements. "How do you do it?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his initial shame. "How do you balance everything?" "One day at a time," Emma replied. "I run my company remotely, mostly early mornings and evenings. This job," she gestured to her uniform, "keeps me grounded. It reminds me that no task is beneath me, that every role has value." Mason felt something shift inside him, a perspective changing, a wall crumbling. The woman sitting across from him wasn't just his maid anymore. She was a successful entrepreneur, a protege of his mother, and possibly the mentor he'd been searching for all along. "I think," he said slowly, respect evident in his voice, "I've been looking at success all wrong." He met her eyes, humility replacing his earlier discomfort. "Would you be willing to tell me more? Not just about my mother, but about how you built your business?" Emma's smile widened, genuine warmth replacing her earlier caution. "I'd like that," she said simply. In the quiet of his office, with the city humming below them, a new understanding passed between them. Two entrepreneurs from different worlds, finding common ground in the legacy of a remarkable woman who had seen potential where others saw only surface appearances. The office felt different now. Mason sat in the growing darkness, the city lights casting long shadows across his desk. He'd dismissed his usual evening meetings, needing time to process the day's revelations. His fingers traced the edge of an old photo frame, one of the few pictures he had of his mother, taken at some corporate function years ago. He'd always seen her as distant, more concerned with social obligations than family. But Emma's stories painted a different picture entirely. A woman who worked behind the scenes, lifting others up while maintaining her public persona, just like Emma herself had done. "I never really knew you, did I?" he whispered to the photograph. In it, his mother wore her signature pearl necklace, her smile polite but reserved. How many other Emmas had she helped? How many dreams had she nurtured while he was away at boarding school, learning to be the perfect heir to the family name? Mason pulled up his company's latest financial reports on his laptop. The numbers that had seemed so damning earlier now felt hollow. He'd been chasing growth at any cost, measuring success in percentages and profit margins. Meanwhile, Emma had built something sustainable, something that actually helped people. His office phone buzzed, another message from the board about damage control for the failing project. He ignored it, instead pulling out his notebook. For the first time in years, he began to write freely, not crafting careful corporate speak or investor presentations. "What do I actually want?" he wrote at the top of the page. The question stared back at him, both simple and terrifying. He hadn't asked himself that since he was young, when he'd dreamed of creating technology that would change lives for the better. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had gotten buried under shareholder expectations and market pressures. He'd become exactly what everyone expected: the ruthless CEO focused solely on the bottom line, the same bottom line that was now failing him. Mason stood and walked to his window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city pulsed with life, millions of stories, millions of dreams. Like Emma's, like his mother's. How many of those dreams never saw the light of day because no one believed in them? His mother had seen something in Emma, something beyond her role as household staff. She'd encouraged that spark, helped it grow, and Emma had done something remarkable with that support. Built an empire while staying true to her values. The idea hit him suddenly, making him straighten. His company had the infrastructure, the technology, the reach, but they'd been using it all wrong, chasing short-term gains instead of lasting impact. What if they could help others like Emma? Give them the tools, the platform, the support to build their own success stories? His hands shook slightly as he returned to his notebook, ideas flowing faster than he could write them down. A technology platform for entrepreneurs, focusing on those who might otherwise be overlooked. Something that combined his tech expertise with the human touch his mother and Emma understood so well. But the board would hate it. The investors would balk at any major pivot, especially now. His current project was already on thin ice. Proposing a complete restructuring would be career suicide. Years of carefully cultivated business relationships would be at risk. Mason sank back into his chair, energy draining as reality set in. The vision was there, clearer than anything he'd seen in years, but the path to it seemed impossible. He was trapped in a web of obligations, expectations, and contracts. He looked at his mother's photo again, then at the door where Emma had stood just hours ago, sharing her truth without fear or apology. Two women who had found ways to make a difference while working within the constraints of their worlds. The answer was there, somewhere in between his current reality and his rediscovered dreams. He just couldn't see it yet. Mason adjusted his tie in the elevator's polished surface, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent wrestling with newfound truths. His usual armor of confidence felt paper-thin as the elevator climbed toward the conference room floor. The weight of his laptop bag seemed heavier than usual. Inside, his standard quarterly presentation waited. All graphs, projections, and carefully crafted explanations for the project's delays. But after last night's revelations, the rehearsed words felt hollow in his mind. "Good morning, Mr. Crawford," his assistant Sarah greeted him as he stepped out. "The investors are already waiting in the maple room." Mason nodded, his throat tight. Through the glass walls he could see them. 5 men in expensive suits, their faces stern as they reviewed documents. Victor Chen, the lead investor, looked up and checked his watch pointedly. Taking a deep breath, Mason pushed open the door. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming this morning." "Mason," Victor responded coolly, "we expected this meeting yesterday afternoon." "I apologize for the rescheduling." Mason set up his laptop, his usually steady hands betraying a slight tremor. "I needed time to review our position thoroughly." "Position?" Lawrence Matthews, another investor, scoffed. "Our position is clear. The project is 6 months behind schedule and bleeding money." Mason launched his presentation, but the familiar slides felt foreign now. As he spoke about market segments and optimization strategies, Emma's words from the previous night echoed in his head. Success didn't have to come at the cost of personal happiness. His mother had understood that. "These projections seem optimistic," Victor interrupted, pointing to a graph, "especially given the current trajectory." "They're based on our historical data," Mason started. "Historical data won't save this project," Lawrence cut in. "We need decisive action. Cost-cutting measures, staff reductions, whatever it takes." Mason's hand paused over his keyboard. A month ago, he would have agreed without hesitation. But now, looking at the faces around the table, he saw something different. Not wisdom or experience, but fear disguised as aggression. "Actually," Mason heard himself say, "I've been considering a different approach." The room fell silent. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh?" "Our core technology has potential beyond its current application. If we pivoted toward supporting small business entrepreneurs—" "Absolutely not," Victor interrupted. "We didn't invest in a charity project, Mason. We invested in a profit-generating enterprise." "It wouldn't be charity," Mason persisted, though his heart hammered in his chest. "There's an untapped market of innovative individuals who just need the right platform." "Like your Maid?" Lawrence smirked, and Mason froze. "Oh yes, we know all about your little chat with the help last night. Is that where this nonsense is coming from?" Heat crept up Mason's neck. "My conversations with my staff are private." "Nothing is private when you're burning through our money," Victor stated flatly. "Your behavior lately has been concerning, Mason. The missed meetings, the lack of progress, and now these alternative ideas." "We need you focused," another investor added. "Dedicated to the original vision." "The original vision was to create meaningful technology," Mason argued, his voice stronger now. "To make a real difference." "The original vision was to make money," Victor cut in sharply, "and you're failing at that rather spectacularly at the moment." The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Mason looked around at these men who had once seemed so impressive to him. Now he saw them differently, trapped in their own narrow view of success, just as he had been. "You have 2 weeks," Victor announced, standing. "Either get this project back on track with concrete results, or we'll be forced to reconsider our position, and your leadership." The others rose as well, gathering their materials. Mason remained seated, his presentation forgotten on the screen behind him. "2 weeks, Mason," Lawrence repeated at the door. "Don't disappoint us again." The door closed behind them, leaving Mason alone in the suddenly too large conference room. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, but for the first time in years, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like possibility. The mansion felt different that evening as Mason wandered through its halls, the setting sun casting long shadows across the marble floors. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he searched for Emma, his mind still churning from the morning's confrontation with the investors. He found her in the library, carefully dusting the antique bookshelves. The sight of her methodically working, knowing now what he knew about her success, made him pause in the doorway. How many times had he walked past her, seeing only what he expected to see? "Emma?" His voice came out softer than intended. She turned, cloth still in hand. "Mr. Crawford." Her eyes studied his face with that quiet intelligence he'd somehow missed before. "You look troubled." Mason ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his tie long since discarded. "The investors weren't exactly thrilled with my new ideas." He moved to the leather armchair near the window, sinking into it. "They gave me 2 weeks to get back in line, essentially." Emma set down her cleaning supplies and approached, her movements unhurried. "And what do you think about that?" "I think—" Mason stared out at the darkening sky. "I think I'm tired of being in line." The meeting today, it was like suddenly seeing everything clearly for the first time. These men, they're not visionaries. They're just scared. Scared of anything that doesn't fit their narrow definition of success. Emma settled into the chair opposite him, her posture relaxed but attentive. And what's your definition of success? The question hung in the air as Mason considered it. I used to think it was about the numbers, stock prices, profit margins, market share. He shook his head. But after our conversation last night, after hearing about my mother, I can't stop thinking about what really matters. Which is? Making a difference. Creating something meaningful. Mason leaned forward, his voice growing animated. Our technology. It has so much potential beyond what we're doing with it. We could help small business owners, entrepreneurs who just need the right tools and support. People like... He gestured toward her. Well, people like you. A small smile touched Emma's lips. That sounds like a worthy goal. But the investors think it's ridiculous. They called it a charity project. Mason's jaw tightened at the memory. They even knew about our conversation last night. Used it against me. Like talking to you somehow proved I was losing my focus. And are you? Emma asked quietly. Losing your focus? Or finding it? Mason met her gaze, struck by the wisdom in her question. I think I've been focused on the wrong things for a long time. Building this company, I lost sight of why I started it in the first place. I wanted to create something that would help people, not just make money. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Emma pointed out. My business succeeds because it provides real value to people. The profit follows naturally from that. That's exactly it. Mason stood, pacing the library floor. We could restructure the entire platform, make it accessible to small businesses, create tools that actually empower people instead of just extracting value from them. But the investors aren't the only path forward, Emma said calmly. Sometimes we need to let go of what's comfortable to build something truly meaningful. Mason stopped pacing, turning to face her. Would you be willing to help me? Your experience, your perspective, it's exactly what this project needs. What I need? Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. Are you sure you want to work with the help? There was no bitterness in her tone, only a gentle challenge. I want to work with someone who understands both business and humanity, Mason replied earnestly. Someone who's built something real, something that matters. I don't care what title you hold here. I care about what you've achieved and how you've achieved it. A warm smile spread across Emma's face. Then yes, I'd be happy to help. Sometimes the best way forward is to stop looking over your shoulder for approval and start following your heart instead. Mason felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For the first time since the morning's confrontation, he felt truly certain about his path forward. Mason spread the papers across his desk, running his fingers through his already disheveled hair. Coffee cups littered the surface, evidence of long hours spent reimagining his company's future. Emma sat across from him, her tablet propped against a stack of market research reports. So if we integrate the AI assistant here, Mason pointed to a flowchart, it could help new business owners navigate the initial paperwork and licensing requirements. His eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm he hadn't felt in months. Emma nodded thoughtfully, making notes on her tablet. That would address one of the biggest hurdles I faced when starting out. The bureaucracy can be overwhelming, especially for someone without a business background. Exactly. Mason stood, pacing as he often did when excited. But what if we took it further, beyond just paperwork assistance? What are you thinking? Emma set down her tablet, giving him her full attention. A complete ecosystem. Mason grabbed a marker and moved to the whiteboard that dominated one wall. Marketing tools, inventory management, accounting software, all integrated and simplified. His hand flew across the board, sketching connections between components. But here's the key difference. Instead of just providing tools, we provide guidance, real, practical support. Emma stood and moved closer to the board, studying his diagram. Like having a business mentor in your pocket? Yes, but better. Mason turned to face her, marker still in hand. The AI can handle the basic questions, but for deeper issues. He paused, watching her reaction. We could build a network of successful entrepreneurs willing to share their expertise. People like you, Emma. She raised an eyebrow. Me? Who better? Mason gestured to her tablet, where her own business analytics were displayed. You built something remarkable from the ground up, while working another job. That's exactly the kind of experience our users would value. Emma was quiet for a moment, considering. It would need to be accessible, she said finally. Not everyone can afford expensive software subscriptions when they're just starting out. Agreed. Mason turned back to the board, adding notes. We could use a tiered pricing model. Basic services at a minimal cost, with premium features for established businesses. They worked through the morning, breaking only when Emma insisted they eat something. She disappeared briefly and returned with sandwiches from the kitchen, setting them on the one clear corner of the desk. What about security? Emma asked between bites. Many women entrepreneurs work from home. They need to protect their personal information. Mason nodded vigorously, swallowing quickly. That's crucial. We'll build in privacy controls from the ground up. Users can choose what to share and with whom. And support services? Emma pressed. Not everyone is tech-savvy. 24/7 customer service, multiple languages. Mason grabbed a fresh sheet of paper. We could partner with local business organizations, offer in-person training sessions. Emma smiled, watching him work. You've changed, she observed quietly. Mason paused, pen hovering over the paper. How so? A week ago, you were focused solely on profit margins and investor presentations. Now you're talking about accessibility and support services. Mason set down his pen, considering her words. I suppose I needed a reminder of what really matters. He met her eyes. Thank you for that. Emma shook her head. Don't thank me yet. We still have to make this work. They returned to their planning, the afternoon slipping away as they refined their vision. Emma's practical experience tempered Mason's technological ambitions, while his technical knowledge helped expand the possibilities of her ideas. By evening, the whiteboard was filled with diagrams and notes, and their initial concept had evolved into something more comprehensive than either had initially imagined. They had sketched out not just a platform, but a community, a space where aspiring entrepreneurs could find the tools, knowledge, and support they needed to succeed. This could really help people, Emma said softly, standing back to survey their work. Not just with the technical aspects of running a business, but with the confidence to start in the first place. Mason nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose he'd been missing for too long. That's the real goal, isn't it? Not just building another tech platform, but empowering people to build their dreams. The afternoon sun streamed through Mason's office windows as Emma spread her business records across his desk. Their weekly development meetings had become a highlight of Mason's schedule, a stark contrast to the tense investor meetings he'd grown accustomed to. Here's how I structured my first marketing campaign, Emma explained, pointing to a spreadsheet. Notice how I started small, testing different approaches before investing more heavily. Mason leaned forward, studying the numbers. Your ROI is impressive, especially for a startup budget. He glanced at her with newfound respect. How did you learn all this? Emma smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Trial and error, mostly. I couldn't afford consultants or fancy courses, so I taught myself. Read everything I could find. Watched tutorials late into the night after finishing my cleaning duties. Mason shook his head, amazed. While I was throwing money at problems, you were actually solving them. Different circumstances lead to different approaches, Emma said diplomatically. She hesitated, then added, though I will say, being overlooked had its advantages. No one was watching, so I could fail and learn without pressure. They continued working through Emma's business model, Mason taking detailed notes. The platform they were developing was beginning to take shape, incorporating lessons from both their experiences. As evening approached, Emma gathered her papers, but Mason noticed her lingering. She seemed to be wrestling with something she wanted to say. "What is it?" he asked softly. Emma sat back down, her usual composure slightly fractured. "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about feeling disconnected from your mother's legacy." She met his eyes. "Would you like to hear more about her?" Mason's throat tightened. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "She used to talk about you all the time," Emma began. "She kept photos of you on her desk, school pictures, sports teams. She was so proud of everything you did." "I barely remember her," Mason admitted, his voice rough. "She was always working, and then she was gone. The house felt so empty after—" "That's why you built all this?" Emma gestured to the mansion around them. "I thought if I was successful enough, it would fill the void." Mason gave a bitter laugh. "Turns out empty space is empty space, no matter how expensive the furniture." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I understand loneliness," she said finally. "When I started my business, people assumed I was just the help playing at being an entrepreneur. No one took me seriously. I had ideas, plans, but—" She shrugged. "The world sees what it expects to see." "How did you handle it?" Mason asked. "I remembered what your mother told me once. She said, 'Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right.'" Emma smiled at the memory. "She saw potential in people that others missed. That's why she hired me, gave me flexible hours so I could work on my business." Mason absorbed this, feeling another piece of his mother's puzzle fall into place. "She would have loved what we're building," he said softly. "A platform to help others achieve their dreams." "She would have been proud of you," Emma said. "Not for your success, but for choosing to make a difference." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened outside. Mason realized that for the first time in years, his massive office didn't feel empty. Emma's presence filled it with something he couldn't quite name. Understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the CEO, not the mansion owner, just me." Emma smiled, her eyes warm. "That's what your mother taught me, to look past the surface, to see people's true potential." She gathered her things to leave. "Same time next week?" Mason nodded, feeling more centered than he had in years. As he watched her go, he understood that they were building more than just a platform. They were building a bridge between two worlds, between privilege and perseverance, between loneliness and connection. And somehow, in the process, they were both finding their way home. Mason's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his heart racing. Emma stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. The prototype of their platform gleamed on the screen before them, ready for its first real test. "Are you sure about this?" Mason asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "What if we're not ready?" Emma's calm voice steadied him. "The only way to know is to try. Remember what we discussed? Start small, learn fast." He nodded, remembering how she'd walked him through her own business's early days. Her methodical approach was so different from his usual grand launches and flashy presentations. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, clicking the launch button. The platform went live, and they watched as the first handful of invited users began to log in. They'd carefully selected a diverse group of aspiring entrepreneurs, from stay-at-home moms with business dreams to college students with innovative ideas. "Look," Emma pointed to the screen. "Sarah's already creating her profile." Sarah was a single mother who wanted to start a sustainable clothing line. Mason leaned forward, watching the user interface respond to Sarah's inputs. "The onboarding flow seems smooth," he observed. "Your suggestion about simplifying the registration process was spot on." "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one," Emma replied, pulling up a chair beside him. "Not everything needs bells and whistles." They spent the next hour monitoring the platform's performance, watching as users explored different features. Emma had insisted on including a feedback button on every page, making it easy for users to report issues or share thoughts. "First feedback coming in," Mason announced, clicking open a notification. "The mentor matching system is incredible," he read aloud. "I've never seen anything that actually understands what new entrepreneurs need." He felt a warm glow of pride, then glanced at Emma. "That was your idea," she shook her head. "It was a collaborative effort. You're the one who built the algorithm." "Based on your experience," he countered. "I just translated your insights into code." More feedback started flowing in. Users praised the platform's intuitive design, its practical resources, and especially the community features that Emma had championed. Every positive comment made Mason more aware of how much of the platform's success stemmed from Emma's quiet wisdom. "This is exactly what I've been looking for," he read from another message. "Finally, someone understands the challenges of starting from scratch." Emma smiled. "That's what matters, that we're helping people who need it." Mason watched her as she reviewed more feedback, noting how she immediately started categorizing user suggestions for future improvements. Her approach was so methodical, so grounded in real experience. His contribution felt almost superficial in comparison. "We should celebrate," Emma suggested, looking up from her notes. "This is a big milestone." Mason agreed, but his enthusiasm felt slightly hollow. He ordered champagne from his private cellar, and they toasted to their success in his office. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, but Mason's thoughts were turned inward. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, noticing his distraction. "The feedback is better than we hoped." "It is," he agreed, swirling the champagne in his glass. I keep thinking about how much of this success is because of you. Your experience, your insights, your understanding of what people really need." He set down his glass. "I'm not sure what I'm really contributing here." "Mason," Emma said firmly, "this platform wouldn't exist without you. Your technical expertise, your resources, your willingness to take a risk on something different, that's what turned this from an idea into reality." He nodded, but the conflict remained. The platform's success felt different from his previous achievements. It wasn't about impressive numbers or stockholder approval. It was about real people finding real help. And that aspect, he realized, came primarily from Emma's influence. As they continued reviewing the feedback, Mason felt grateful for Emma's guidance, but increasingly uncertain about his own role in their growing success. The platform was working, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was more of a facilitator than a true creator. Mason sat in his office, reviewing the latest metrics from their platform. The numbers were promising, user engagement was high, and the testimonials kept pouring in. A smile crossed his face as he read another success story from one of their entrepreneurs. His phone buzzed, interrupting his moment of satisfaction. It was Richard Sterling, one of his primary investors. Mason's stomach tightened as he read the message. "Concerned about recent developments. Meeting needed ASAP." The platform notifications continued to ping with positive feedback, but Mason could barely focus on them now. He'd known this conversation was coming. Over the past few weeks, his investors had been dropping subtle hints about their disapproval of his side project. "Mr. Zhang from Allied Partners is online too," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "He says it's urgent." Mason took a deep breath before picking up the phone. "James, good morning." "Mason, we need to discuss these reports." Mr. Zhang's voice was clipped. "Your attendance at board meetings has dropped 30%. Your quarterly projections are down. And now I'm hearing rumors about some kind of social entrepreneurship platform." "It's a technological solution for emerging entrepreneurs," Mason explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "The early results are extremely promising." "That's not what your company was built for," Mr. Zhang cut him off. "We invested in cutting-edge tech development, not a charity project." The word charity stung. Mason gripped the phone tighter. "It's not charity. It's a viable business model that—" "A business model developed with your housekeeper?" The disdain in Mr. Zhang's voice was unmistakable. "Mason, you're losing focus. Your primary responsibility is to your existing shareholders." After hanging up, Mason slumped in his chair. His computer pinged with another calendar invite, this one from Victoria Walsh, his most influential investor. The subject line read, "Urgent discussion, company direction." The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. Mason spent the intervening hours preparing his defense, gathering data about the platform's potential. But as he rode the elevator to the top floor of Walsh Investments, he knew numbers alone wouldn't be enough. Victoria's office was all steel and glass, matching her reputation for cold efficiency. She didn't look up from her tablet as Mason entered, letting him stand there for a full minute before acknowledging his presence. "Sit down, Mason," she finally said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came with controlling billions in investments. "We need to have a serious discussion about your recent activities." Mason settled into the chair across from her desk, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "The platform is showing excellent growth potential." "Stop," Victoria held up her hand. "This isn't about your little side project's metrics. This is about you, your focus, your commitment to the company we built together." "The company is still my primary focus," Mason insisted. "Is it?" Victoria turned her tablet around, showing him a graph. "Your core business development has slowed by 15%. 3 major clients have expressed concerns about your availability. And now I hear you're spending your evenings working with your maid on some kind of startup incubator." "Emma is a successful entrepreneur in her own right," Mason defended. But Victoria wasn't listening. "Mason?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You need to understand something. Your reputation in this industry isn't just about your technical skills. It's about your judgment, your ability to stay focused on what matters." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "This little distraction of yours, it's not just affecting your company's performance, it's making you look unstable to the board, unfocused, weak." Mason felt his throat tighten. "The platform has real potential." "The platform," Victoria turned back to face him, "is a liability. You're the CEO of a major tech company, not some small-time mentor for wannabe entrepreneurs. If you continue down this path, you're going to destroy everything you've built, everything we've invested in." She returned to her desk and sat down, her expression softening slightly. "I'm saying this for your own good, Mason. End this distraction now. Return your focus to where it belongs, or we'll be forced to reconsider our position in your company." Mason paced the length of his home office, his reflection fragmenting across the floor-to-ceiling windows as night fell over the city. Victoria's words echoed in his mind, each syllable striking like a hammer against his conscience. The threat of losing his investors' support wasn't just about money. It was about everything he'd built. Everything he'd believed defined him. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. The stack of user feedback reports from the platform sat on his desk, filled with stories of hope and gratitude. Next to them lay the quarterly projections for his main company, numbers highlighted in threatening red. "Everything you've built," he muttered to himself, running his hands through his hair. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built his tech company from scratch, yet he'd never felt as fulfilled as he did working on the platform with Emma. Sleep eluded him that night. He tried working, answering emails, even attempted meditation, but his mind wouldn't quiet. Around 3 a.m, he found himself in his kitchen, making coffee he didn't need, staring at the empty space where Emma usually worked during the day. The first rays of dawn found him slumped in his office chair, tie discarded, shirt wrinkled. He hadn't slept at all. His phone buzzed with messages from the board members, each one adding weight to his shoulders. The morning light cast long shadows across his desk, and he watched dust motes dance in the golden beams, feeling oddly disconnected from everything. When Emma arrived at her usual time, she immediately noticed something was wrong. Mason's appearance was disheveled, unusual for someone who typically maintained immaculate standards. His eyes were red-rimmed, and coffee cups littered his desk. She went about her morning routine, keeping a careful eye on him. When she brought him his morning coffee, she noticed the untouched dinner from the night before still sitting on the side table. "You haven't eaten?" she stated simply, her quiet voice cutting through his fog. Mason looked up, startled. He'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes without reading it. "I'm not hungry." Emma set down the coffee and turned to face him fully. "Something happened yesterday with your investors." It wasn't a question. Mason swiveled his chair to face the window, avoiding her perceptive gaze. "They want me to shut down the platform. They say it's a distraction." "And what do you think it is?" Emma's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it he'd never heard before. Mason turned back to face her, struggling to find the right words. I think it's the first thing I've done in years that feels real. But I can't just throw away everything I've built. The company, the partnerships, the trust of my investors. Are you sure that's what you'd be throwing away?" Emma stepped closer, her usually reserved demeanor replaced by an intense focus. "Or would you be throwing away the chance to build something meaningful?" Mason slumped in his chair. "You don't understand. Without their support—" "I understand perfectly," Emma interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand what it's like to have people tell you what you should be, what you should want. But at some point, Mason, you have to decide what matters to you, not to them." She moved to the window, looking out at the city below. "When I started my business, everyone told me I was being foolish, that I should be content with what I had, that I was reaching beyond my station." She turned back to face him. "But I knew what I wanted, what I could achieve. The question is, do you?" Mason felt something shift inside him, a recognition of truth in her words. The weight of expectation he'd carried for so long seemed to crystallize, becoming clear and distinct from his own desires for the first time. Emma watched him process this, then spoke again, her voice softening. "You need to trust your instincts, Mason. They've been trying to tell you something for a while now. The question is, are you ready to listen?" Mason adjusted his tie one final time, studying his reflection in the elevator's polished doors. The familiar ride to the top floor of the corporate building felt different today. His heart pounded against his crisp white shirt, but his resolve remained steady. The conference room doors loomed before him, their heavy wooden panels a reminder of all the deals and decisions that had been made within. Through the glass walls, he could see his investors already seated. Richard Thompson, the lead investor, sat at the head of the table, his silver hair and stern expression as intimidating as ever. Beside him, Sarah Chen and Marcus Wade reviewed documents with furrowed brows. Taking a deep breath, Mason pushed open the doors. The familiar scent of coffee and leather filled his nostrils as he stepped inside. "Mason," Richard acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "We weren't expecting you today." "I know." Mason remained standing, his hands resting on the back of a chair. "But we need to talk about the direction of the company." Sarah set down her pen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the glass table. "If this is about your side project with your maid, we've already made our position clear." "Her name is Emma," Mason said firmly, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. "And she's not just a maid. She's a successful entrepreneur who's built something remarkable from nothing." Marcus scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "We've looked into her little online business. It's hardly comparable to what we're trying to achieve here." "That's where you're wrong." Mason pulled out his chair and sat down, spreading out the documents he'd brought. "Emma's business model is exactly what we need. She's created something sustainable, something that actually helps people." "Help people?" Richard's voice dripped with disdain. "We're not running a charity, Mason. We're here to make money. Why can't we do both?" Mason pushed the market analysis across the table. "The platform Emma and I are developing has already shown incredible potential. The user feedback—" "Stop." Richard held up his hand. "Just stop. This isn't what we invested in. This isn't what we agreed to." "Times change," Mason countered, his confidence growing. "Markets change. We need to adapt." Sarah leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Let me be very clear, Mason. If you continue down this path, you're on your own. No more funding, no more support." "We've invested millions in this company," Marcus added. "We're not about to watch you throw it all away on some feel-good project with your housekeeper." Mason felt his face flush with anger, but kept his voice steady. "Emma has built a business that generates more revenue than we do, with zero outside investment. Maybe that's exactly what we need to learn from." Richard stood up slowly, his hands pressed against the table. "This is your final warning, Mason. Drop this nonsense and get back to what we agreed on, or we're done." The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with years of expectations and obligations. Mason looked around the table, at the faces of people who had backed him from the beginning, people who had believed in him, or at least in what they wanted him to be. "I can't do that," Mason said quietly but firmly. "I won't." "Then you leave us no choice." Richard gathered his papers. "We'll be withdrawing our support, effective immediately. Our legal team will be in touch." Sarah and Marcus stood as well, their chairs scraping against the floor in unified disappointment. Mason remained seated, watching as they filed out of the conference room, leaving him alone with the weight of his decision. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty chairs. Mason loosened his tie, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The rejection stung, but underneath it there was something else. A sense of relief, of finally choosing his own path. He pulled out his phone, looking at the last message from Emma. "Trust your instincts." Despite everything that had just happened, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Mason knew he had made the right choice. Mason's footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he made his way back to his office. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. His phone buzzed constantly, likely his legal team trying to reach him about the investor's withdrawal, but he couldn't bring himself to look at it. Instead, he found himself walking past his office, past the reception area, and toward the small room where Emma usually took her breaks. He needed to tell her what had happened, even though the thought of admitting his failure made his stomach churn. He found her organizing supplies in the break room, her movements precise and efficient as always. When she looked up and saw his expression, her hands stilled. "They pulled out, didn't they?" she asked softly, already reading the answer in his face. Mason nodded, sinking into one of the plain wooden chairs at the small table. "All of them. Richard made it clear. Either I drop our project, or they withdraw completely." He ran a hand through his hair, his perfectly styled appearance beginning to crack. "I chose our project." Emma put down the cleaning supplies and sat across from him, her presence calm and steady. "How are you feeling about that choice?" "Honestly?" Mason let out a shaky breath. "Terrified. Without their backing, the company could collapse within months. Years of work, just—" He made a gesture with his hands, indicating everything falling apart. "Look at me, Mason," Emma said, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you remember what you told me last week about your original vision for the company? Before the investors shaped it into what they wanted?" Mason thought back to their late-night conversation, when he'd shared his initial dreams of creating technology that would make a real difference in people's lives. "I wanted to help small business owners compete in the digital age, to give them tools that big corporations take for granted." "And that's exactly what we're building now," Emma pointed out. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been keeping track of the feedback from our test users. Real people, Mason. People like me who started with nothing but determination." She opened the notebook and slid it across the table. Mason looked down at the neat rows of comments and testimonials she'd collected. Stories of people who'd tried their prototype platform and found hope in it. "But without funding," he began. "I built my business with zero outside investment," Emma reminded him. "It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but it was sustainable. And more importantly, it was mine." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Your investors wanted quick returns and flashy numbers, but real success? That's built one satisfied customer at a time." Mason felt something shift inside him as he listened to her words. The panic began to recede, replaced by a different kind of energy. "You really think we can do this without them?" "I know we can," Emma said firmly. "My business is profitable enough to help fund the initial stages. We can start small, prove the concept works, and grow organically." She smiled slightly. "Sometimes the best things grow from the bottom up, not the top down." Mason looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the quiet maid he'd first known, but a woman who had built something remarkable through sheer determination and wisdom, the same wisdom she was now sharing with him. "It won't be easy," he said, but there was a new strength in his voice. "No," Emma agreed, "but it will be worth it. And this time, you'll be building something true to your heart, not just your investors' expectations." Mason sat up straighter, feeling a spark of hope despite the morning's devastation. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, it felt right. With Emma's guidance and his tech expertise, they could create something meaningful, something that would help others achieve their dreams. "Where do we start?" he asked, pulling the notebook closer to study the user feedback more carefully. The office felt different at night. Without the usual bustle of employees and meetings, Mason's tech company headquarters took on an almost ethereal quality. The overhead lights were dimmed, leaving most of the illumination to come from the soft glow of computer screens and the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mason sat at his desk, his tie long discarded and shirt sleeves rolled up, staring intently at lines of code. Emma occupied the chair next to him, her usual maid's uniform replaced by comfortable jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail as she reviewed user feedback on her laptop. "There's something wrong with the payment processing system," Mason muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. "The test transactions are timing out randomly." Emma glanced over at his screen. Could it be related to the server load? We've had more beta users signing up than expected. Maybe. Mason pushed back from his desk and stretched. Empty coffee cups littered the surface between their laptops. I still can't believe how many people want to try the platform, even in its basic form. People recognize authenticity, Emma said, highlighting another user comment. They can tell we're building this to actually help them, not just to make money. Mason smiled, remembering how different this felt from his previous projects. Without the pressure of investor expectations, they were free to focus on what really mattered, creating something useful for small business owners. Look at this feedback, Emma continued, turning her laptop toward him. Sarah, a single mom in Ohio, used our basic accounting template to organize her home-based bakery business. She says it's the first time she's felt in control of her finances. Mason leaned in to read the comment, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. This was what he'd originally wanted to do with technology, help real people solve real problems. An error message flashed across his screen, interrupting his thoughts. Damn it, he muttered, turning back to his own computer. The payment system crashed again. Take a break, Emma suggested, standing up. I'll make us some fresh coffee and we can look at it with fresh eyes. While Emma went to the break room, Mason walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were quiet at this hour, but he knew there were countless small business owners out there, working late just like them, trying to make their dreams reality. Emma returned with 2 steaming cups, handing one to Mason. You know what I think the problem might be? She said, blowing on her coffee. We're trying to make the payment system too complicated. Remember what you told me about your mother? How she always said the simplest solution is often the best. Mason turned from the window, surprised. You remember me telling you that? Of course, Emma smiled. It's good advice. We don't need fancy features right now. We just need something that works reliably. Mason took a sip of coffee and nodded slowly. You're right. Let me try something. He returned to his computer and began typing rapidly, stripping away layers of unnecessary code. Hours passed as they worked side by side, Emma testing each new iteration while Mason refined the system. The sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn when Mason finally sat back with a satisfied sigh. Try it now, he said. Emma ran another test transaction. The payment processed smoothly, no error messages in sight. It works, she exclaimed, grinning at him. Just then, Mason's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number. It was barely 6 a.m. Who would be calling this early? Mason Reynolds speaking, he answered, trying to sound more awake than he felt. His eyes widened as he listened to the caller. Emma watched his expression change from tired to amazed. He put the phone on speaker so she could hear too. Very impressed with what we've seen of your platform, the caller was saying. Our venture capital firm specializes in socially responsible tech investments, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of backing your project. Emma and Mason exchanged excited looks. After weeks of setbacks and late nights, after losing his original investors and starting from scratch, here was a chance at support from someone who seemed to understand their vision. Mason sat at his desk, scrolling through the growing list of platform sign-ups. Each notification represented another entrepreneur taking their first steps toward building their dreams. The steady ping of new registrations had become a familiar soundtrack to their days. Look at this, Emma called from her workspace, now permanently set up in what used to be Mason's private office. We've got another success story. She turned her screen toward him, showing a beautifully crafted email from a user named Maria. Mason moved his chair closer to read. Maria had used their platform to launch her handmade jewelry business, turning a hobby into a thriving online store within weeks. Her words of gratitude touched something deep inside him. "What strikes me," Emma said, highlighting portions of the email, "is how she mentions feeling empowered. It's not just about the technical tools we're providing." Mason nodded, thinking about their marketing approach. "We need to focus more on that aspect. The emotional journey of starting a business, especially for women who might not have traditional support systems." Emma pulled up their current marketing materials on her tablet. "I've been working on some ideas. Instead of leading with features and statistics, what if we share more stories like Maria's?" "Show, don't tell," Mason agreed, remembering how his own perspective had shifted after learning Emma's story. "We could create a section on the platform for user testimonials and success stories." They spent the next few hours restructuring their outreach strategy. Emma drew from her own experience building her business, identifying the pain points and fears that held many women back from pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams. "Remember how scared I was to tell you about my business?" Emma said, looking up from her notes. "Many women feel that same fear of not being taken seriously." Mason felt a twinge of embarrassment, remembering how he'd initially underestimated Emma. "That's exactly what we need to address. The platform should feel like a safe space where everyone's dreams are valid." As they worked, more success stories flooded in. A single mother who started a virtual assistant business, a retired teacher launching an online tutoring service, a college student building a sustainable fashion brand. Each of these women, Emma observed, they're not just starting businesses, they're changing their lives, their families' lives. Mason leaned back in his chair, letting that sink in. He thought about his previous definition of success, the endless pursuit of bigger deals, higher profits, impressive quarterly reports. It all seemed hollow now. "You know what's different about this project?" he said quietly. "For the first time, I'm not thinking about the exit strategy or the potential buyout offers. I'm thinking about Maria and all the others like her who just need someone to believe in them." Emma smiled, understanding in her eyes. "That's why it's working. People can feel the authenticity." Their platform's community forum was buzzing with activity. Users weren't just using the tools, they were connecting with each other, sharing advice, offering encouragement. What they'd built was becoming more than just a business platform. It was evolving into a supportive community. "We're not just providing software," Mason realized aloud. "We're providing confidence, permission to dream bigger." He thought about his mother, how she'd encouraged Emma years ago. Without knowing it, he'd created something that honored her legacy of helping others. The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows as they continued fine-tuning their approach. Every decision they made now came from a place of genuine desire to serve their users, to make a real difference in people's lives. Mason watched Emma work, her focus intense as she drafted new content for their website. He thought about how far they'd come from that night when she'd found him alone in his office, lost and questioning everything. Success, he was learning, wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the lives they touched, the dreams they helped make possible. Mason stared at the analytics dashboard, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Emma, come look at this!" he called out, his voice carrying an excitement he hadn't felt in months. Emma hurried over from her desk, coffee mug in hand. The morning sun streamed through the office windows, casting a warm glow on their faces as they both leaned in to study the screen. 10,000 active users, Emma breathed, a smile spreading across her face. And look at the engagement metrics. The numbers told a story that neither of them had dared to hope for just a few months ago. Their platform wasn't just attracting users. People were staying, connecting, and building their businesses through it. "Remember when we were hoping for just 100 beta testers?" Mason chuckled, scrolling through the data. The graphs showed steady growth, with spikes in user registration following their recent marketing campaigns. Emma set her mug down and pulled up their user feedback folder. "It's not just the numbers," she said, opening several messages. "Look at these testimonials. Women are finding their confidence, starting businesses they've only dreamed about." Mason read through the messages, each one reinforcing that they were creating something meaningful. A former schoolteacher had launched her own educational consulting business. A young mother had turned her passion for sustainable fashion into a thriving online boutique. "We need to celebrate this," Mason declared, standing up from his desk. He walked to the small kitchen area they'd set up in the office and pulled out 2 champagne flutes he'd been saving for a special occasion. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Champagne at 10 in the morning?" "Why not?" Mason grinned, producing a bottle from the mini-fridge. "We've earned this moment." The cork popped with a satisfying sound, and he carefully filled both glasses. As they clinked their glasses together, Mason couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The night Emma had found him at his lowest point seemed like a lifetime ago. "To 10,000 dreams in the making," Emma toasted, her eyes sparkling. They spent the next hour reviewing their milestone achievements, marking each significant step that had led to this moment. The first successful beta test, the launch of their mentorship program, the community forums that had taken on a life of their own. "Look at this thread," Emma pointed out, showing Mason a conversation between users. "They're not just using our platform, they're supporting each other, sharing resources, building real connections." Mason nodded, remembering their original vision. "That's exactly what we wanted to create. Not just another business tool, but a real community." The morning light had shifted to afternoon warmth as they continued to celebrate their success. Mason noticed how naturally they worked together now, how their different perspectives and experiences had created something neither of them could have achieved alone. "I need to say something," Mason said, setting down his empty champagne flute. He turned to face Emma, his expression sincere. "None of this would have happened without you." Emma started to protest, but Mason held up his hand. "No, really. That night, when everything seemed hopeless, you didn't just see a boss in crisis. You saw potential for change. You shared your wisdom, your experience." He gestured around the office. "You helped create all of this." "We did this together," Emma responded softly, but Mason could see she was touched by his words. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the afternoon sun paint shadows across their office. The quiet was broken only by the occasional ping of new user notifications, each sound a reminder of another entrepreneur taking their first steps toward their dreams. "It feels good, doesn't it?" Emma said finally. "Building something that matters?" Mason nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment he'd never known in his previous ventures. This wasn't just success, it was purpose. They remained in their seats, savoring the moment and the sense of accomplishment that filled the room. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But they had reached a milestone worth celebrating. Mason stood by the office window, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over the skyline. The office was quiet, except for the gentle tapping of Emma's keyboard as she finished up some work. These late evenings had become a comfortable routine for them, the silence filled with a sense of companionship rather than the loneliness he used to feel. "Tea?" Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. She was already moving toward their small kitchen area, knowing his answer before he gave it. "Please," he replied, turning from the window. He watched as she prepared their usual evening ritual, chamomile for her, green tea for him. Her movements were graceful and precise, much like how she approached everything in life. "You're thinking too hard again," she observed, bringing over their steaming mugs. "I can see it in your shoulders." Mason accepted the tea with a grateful smile. "Just reflecting," he said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs they'd added to the office. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here, like this?" Emma sat across from him, tucking her legs underneath her. "Honestly? No. When I first started working here, you were—" She paused, searching for the right words. "A complete mess?" he offered, with a self-deprecating laugh. "I was going to say different," she corrected gently. "More guarded, less willing to see beyond the surface of things." Mason nodded, remembering how he used to be. "I was trapped in my own expectations," he admitted, "and everyone else's. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that night." "You would have figured it out eventually," Emma said, but Mason shook his head. "No, I wouldn't have. I needed someone who could see through all the walls I'd built." He took a sip of his tea, letting the warmth spread through him. "You know, my mother would have liked you." Emma's eyes softened at the mention of his mother. "She was an amazing woman. The way she encouraged me, believed in me, it changed my life." "Tell me more about her," Mason asked quietly. These conversations about his mother had become precious to him, each one revealing another facet of the woman he'd never truly known. Emma settled more comfortably in her chair, cradling her mug. "There was this one day," she began, "when she found me crying in the garden. I'd just been rejected for a small business loan, and I felt like all my dreams were crumbling. Instead of just offering sympathy, she sat with me for hours, helping me revise my business plan. She taught me that setbacks aren't failures, they're opportunities to rebuild stronger." Mason felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That sounds like what you did for me." "Maybe she taught me more than I realized," Emma smiled softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. The city lights twinkled beyond the window, and the office felt like a warm cocoon around them. "I never expected this," Mason said finally, gesturing between them. "To find someone who understands me so completely, who challenges me to be better, but accepts me as I am." Emma set her mug down, her eyes meeting his. "Life has a funny way of giving us what we need, even when we don't know we need it. When I think about where we started, me, the arrogant CEO, and you, the just a maid, who turned out to be so much more." Mason shook his head in wonder. "We've built something amazing together, haven't we? Not just the platform, but this connection." "We have," Emma agreed softly. "Something special." Mason felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the tea. "I've never had someone in my life who I trust as completely as I trust you, Emma, both professionally and personally. You've become—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I know," Emma smiled, understanding in her eyes. "I feel the same way." The city hummed quietly beyond their windows, and the evening wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. In the gentle quiet of their shared space, both Mason and Emma knew they'd found something rare and precious, a partnership that transcended business, a connection that had grown into something neither of them had expected, but both now treasured deeply. Mason stared at his tablet, his jaw clenched. The news article's headline seemed to mock him. "Tech Giant Launches Revolutionary Platform for Women Entrepreneurs." Beside him, Emma leaned closer to read, her shoulder brushing against his. "Tech Vision," she murmured, scanning the article. "They're calling it Empower Her." "Original," Mason said dryly, but his attempt at humor fell flat. His hands tightened around the tablet. "They have resources we can't match. A development team of hundreds, marketing budgets in the millions." Emma took the tablet from his hands and set it aside. "Look at me, Mason." He turned to face her, seeing the quiet determination in her eyes that had become so familiar over their months of partnership. "Do you know why I succeeded with my business when everyone said I couldn't?" she asked. "Because I wasn't trying to be like everyone else. I was being authentic, staying true to what I believed in." "This is different," Mason argued, running a hand through his hair. "Tech vision can crush us. They're already advertising features we haven't even developed yet." "Then we'll develop better ones," Emma said firmly. "We have something they don't, real experience. I built my business from nothing. You understand the tech world from the inside out? Together we know what our users actually need, not just what looks good in a boardroom presentation." Mason stood up and paced to the window, his reflection ghostly against the city lights. "Our user base has been growing steadily, but their launch could change everything. People might jump ship for the bigger, flashier platform." "Some might," Emma acknowledged, joining him at the window. "But others will stay because they believe in what we're doing. Because we're not just another tech company. We're building a community." Their development team was gathered in the main office space beyond the glass walls. Mason watched them working, their faces lit by computer screens. These people had believed in their vision, had taken a chance on a startup when they could have had secure jobs at bigger companies. "We need to call a meeting," he said finally, turning to Emma. "Get everyone together." 20 minutes later, their team sat around the conference table, faces concerned as Mason shared the news about TechVision's launch. He could see the worry in their expressions, the same fear he'd felt when he first read the article. But then Emma stepped forward, her quiet presence commanding attention without demanding it. "I want to tell you about my first year in business," she began. "I was working out of my apartment, competing against established brands with fancy websites and professional photo shoots. I had none of that. What I had was understanding. I knew exactly what my customers needed because I'd been in their shoes." The team listened intently as she continued. "That's what we have here. We're not just building features. We're creating solutions for real problems we've faced ourselves. TechVision may have more money and more developers, but they don't have our perspective." Mason felt energy returning to the room as Emma spoke. He saw heads nodding, saw determination replacing uncertainty in their faces. "We're not going to try to copy them," he added, building on Emma's words. "We're going to innovate in our own way. Sarah, remember that mentorship feature you proposed last month? Let's fast-track it. James, your idea about integrated financial planning tools, we're making that a priority." The team began to buzz with ideas, the initial fear transforming into creative energy. Emma caught Mason's eye across the table, a small smile playing at her lips. "We'll need to work harder than ever," Mason continued, "but we're not backing down. This platform isn't just about making money, it's about making a difference, and that's something worth fighting for." The meeting evolved into a brainstorming session, with ideas flowing freely. Mason watched as his team, their team, came alive with possibility rather than shrinking from the challenge. Emma moved among them, offering insights and encouragement, her quiet strength helping to anchor their renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were choosing to thrive, to push beyond what seemed possible. The competition from TechVision wasn't just a threat. It was becoming fuel for their determination to create something truly meaningful. Mason's fingers flew across the keyboard, his screen filled with lines of code. The office hummed with focused energy as their team worked to implement the new features. The soft glow of desk lamps created islands of light in the darkening space. No one had noticed the sun setting. "The mentorship matching algorithm is almost ready for testing," he called out to Emma, who was reviewing user feedback reports at her desk nearby. She looked up, dark circles under her eyes betraying long hours, but her smile remained warm. "Perfect timing. Sarah just finished the UI design for the mentor profiles." Their team had been working around the clock for 2 weeks since TechVision's launch, but instead of trying to match their competitor feature for feature, they'd taken Emma's advice to heart, focusing on creating something unique that addressed real needs they understood firsthand. "James, how's the financial planning integration coming along?" Emma asked, walking over to where their lead developer sat surrounded by empty coffee cups. "Just solved the last security issue," James replied, stretching. "The beta version should be ready for internal testing tomorrow." Mason watched Emma move through the office, checking in with each team member. She had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued, just as she'd done for him months ago when she was still his maid. Now, she was the heart of their company, bringing humanity to the tech world he'd always known. "Everyone, gather round," Mason called out suddenly, noticing something on his news feed. The team congregated in the common area, faces tired but curious. "Forbes just published an article about women in tech," he announced, projecting the article onto the wall screen. "They're featuring different platforms that support women entrepreneurs and—" He scrolled down. "We're mentioned." The room grew quiet as they read. The article praised their platform's innovative approach, particularly highlighting the integrated mentorship program and financial planning tools. But what caught everyone's attention was the final paragraph. While tech giants rush to capture the female entrepreneur market with flashy features, smaller platforms like Mason Chen and Emma Taylor's startup are leading the way in actual innovation. Their approach, focused on community building and practical support, demonstrates a deep understanding of what women entrepreneurs really need to succeed. Sarah, their UI designer, was the first to break the silence. "They get it," she said softly. "They actually understand what we're trying to do here." Emma's phone began buzzing with notifications. "Our user signups just spiked," she reported, eyes widening. "The article is being shared across social media." Mason refreshed their analytics dashboard. "Mentor applications are flooding in too. Established businesswomen who want to join the platform." The energy in the room shifted from exhaustion to excitement as more notifications poured in. Their platform was being discussed in entrepreneurship forums, shared in women's business groups, and praised for its practical, community-focused approach. "This is what we've been working for," Emma said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Not just to build another platform, but to create something that really helps people." Mason looked around at their team, at James with his mountain of coffee cups, Sarah with her meticulously organized design files, and all the others who'd believed in their vision. They weren't just competing with tech vision anymore. They were creating their own category. "The Forbes article is just the beginning," he said, standing up. "We've proven that understanding our users matters more than having the biggest budget. Now let's show them what else we can do." The team dispersed back to their desks with renewed energy, ideas flowing freely. Mason caught Emma's eye across the room, seeing his own mix of exhaustion and excitement reflected there. They'd chosen to stay true to their vision instead of chasing their competitors, and now that decision was paying off in ways they hadn't imagined. The national recognition wasn't just validation. It was proof that their approach was filling a real need in the market. Their platform wasn't just surviving in tech vision's shadow, it was blazing its own trail. Mason stood at the window of their new office space, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and pink. The view wasn't as high as his old office, but somehow it felt more meaningful. Behind him, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room as their team celebrated their latest milestone. 1 million active users, Emma announced, joining him at the window. She handed him a glass of champagne, her eyes bright with pride. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Mason shook his head, smiling. "Not when we first started, especially not after losing those investors." He turned to face the room, taking in the scene. Their team had grown from a handful of dedicated developers to 30 passionate individuals, each bringing their unique strengths to the platform. Remember when we were working out of your home office? Emma asked, gesturing to their new space. The modern open-plan office buzzed with energy, decorated with motivational posters and user success stories on the walls. Now look at us. Sarah, their UI designer, approached them with a tablet. You need to see these latest testimonials, she said excitedly. We're getting incredible feedback from the mentor matching program. Mason and Emma leaned in to read. A successful restaurant owner in Chicago had connected with a mentor through their platform and secured funding for her expansion. A young tech entrepreneur in Boston had found the guidance she needed to patent her innovation. Story after story of women supporting women, creating a ripple effect of success. The community aspect really took off, James called from his desk, where he was monitoring their analytics dashboard. The peer support groups are our most active feature now. Emma nodded, her expression softening. That's what was missing from other platforms. Real connection, real support. The office door opened, and Lisa, their new PR director, burst in waving her phone. The Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature on us. They're especially interested in your story, Emma, from Maid to tech company co-founder. Mason watched Emma's cheeks flush slightly. She still wasn't entirely comfortable in the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes, but her journey had become an inspiration to many of their users. We should do it, Mason said gently. Your story might help other women realize they don't have to fit into anyone else's mold of success. Emma considered for a moment, then nodded. As long as we can focus on the platform and our users too, their stories are just as important. The celebration continued around them as team members shared their favorite moments from their journey. The late-night coding sessions, the user feedback meetings, the breakthrough moments when features finally worked as intended. Mason moved to the center of the room, tapping his glass for attention. I want to thank each one of you, he began, looking around at the faces that had become like family. A year ago, this was just an idea, a hope that we could create something meaningful. But it became so much more, Emma added, joining him. We didn't just build a platform, we built a community, a support system for women who dream big but need guidance to get there. To 1 million users, Mason raised his glass, and to the millions more we'll help in the future. To our amazing team, Emma added. We couldn't have done this without you. As the team cheered and clinked glasses, Mason caught Emma's eye. They shared a quiet moment of understanding. This success meant more than just numbers on a screen or articles in prestigious publications. They'd created something that was changing lives, including their own. The sun had fully set now, and the city lights twinkled through the windows. The office hummed with conversation and laughter, plans for new features and excited discussions about future possibilities. Their platform had become a beacon of hope for aspiring entrepreneurs, and their team had become a family united by a shared mission. Mason and Emma stepped onto the small balcony, letting the cool evening air wash over them. Below, the city pulsed with life and possibility. They had built something real, something meaningful, not just a successful business, but a force for positive change. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking steadily. Journalists filled the seats, laptops open and ready. Mason adjusted his tie, standing off to the side of the stage while the company's PR director made the introductions. Emma touched his arm gently. Nervous? She asked, looking elegant in her navy blue business suit. A little, Mason admitted, but in a good way. He smiled at her, remembering how far they'd come from that night in his office when she was still his maid. You? Terrified, Emma said with a quiet laugh. But like you said, in a good way. The PR director's voice rose. And now, I'm pleased to introduce our co-founders, Mason Carter and Emma Bennett. Applause filled the room as they walked onto the stage together. The lights were bright, but Mason could still make out familiar faces in the crowd. Their development team, early investors who had believed in their vision, and even some of their platform's most successful users. Mason stepped up to the podium first. 1 year ago, our platform was just an idea born out of frustration with the status quo. Today, we're proud to announce that Empower has reached over 2 million active users worldwide. More applause erupted. Emma moved forward to join him at the podium. Our mission was simple, she continued, her voice steady and confident. We wanted to create a space where women entrepreneurs could find the support, resources, and mentorship they need to succeed. They took turns highlighting the platform's achievements, the successful funding matches, the mentorship programs, the community support groups that had formed organically. Pictures appeared on the large screen behind them, showing women who had built thriving businesses through their platform. But perhaps the most meaningful metric, Mason said, isn't in our user numbers or our growth statistics. It's in the stories we hear every day. He gestured to the front row, where several of their platform's success stories sat. Like Sarah Chen, who turned her grandmother's recipe into a national food brand, or Maria Rodriguez, who developed an eco-friendly packaging solution that's now being used by major retailers. Emma stepped forward. These women, and thousands like them, had the vision and the drive. They just needed the right tools and support to make their dreams reality. She paused, making eye contact with various audience members. That's what Empower is all about, believing in people's potential and giving them the resources to reach it. The press conference continued with a Q&A session. Journalists asked about their expansion plans, their new features, and their response to competing platforms. Mason and Emma handled each question with practiced ease, their responses showing both their technical expertise and their genuine passion for their mission. One reporter asked Emma about her journey from Maid to tech company co-founder. She answered with characteristic grace, using her story to highlight the platform's mission. Success doesn't look the same for everyone, she said. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right opportunity and support to emerge. Mason watched her as she spoke, feeling a surge of pride and affection. She caught his eye and smiled briefly before continuing her response. As the formal presentation ended, they moved through the crowd, shaking hands and having brief conversations with journalists and supporters. The energy in the room was electric, filled with optimism and possibility. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, they found a quiet moment near the window overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the skyline, painting the buildings in shades of gold. "I think that went well," Emma said softly, watching the last few reporters pack up their equipment. Mason nodded, taking in the view. "It did, though I still can't believe we're here sometimes." "Me neither," Emma admitted. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with emotion. "Remember that night when I first walked into your office? How could I forget?" Mason smiled, reaching for her hand. "You changed everything that night.